use in the future. And for folks that are unable to make it, we will be sharing these on our YouTube page. My name is Monique Diaz. I am your judge of the 150th Civil District Court, and I am your co-chair of the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence. I would like to welcome you all to our third annual CCDV Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium. This year's symposium is focused on the intersection of domestic violence and its impact on children. We took on this focus for a number of reasons. We know that survivors of one form of violence are more likely to become victims or perpetrators of further violence in the future, including domestic violence. That's part of the reason why domestic violence is a vicious cycle that can be passed on from one generation to the next. We at the CCDV have been working very hard to improve our community's responses to domestic violence, but also to implement strategies that can prevent domestic violence before it occurs. And that's where you all come in and why we hold this symposium every single year. Together, we know that every one of us can help break generational cycles of abuse. Each of us can play an important role by increasing our understanding of the issue, by learning concrete ways we can help families in need, in particular children. And that's what we're doing here at this year's symposium. This year, we're focusing on the most helpless of all victims and survivors, the children, the ones who count on us to do more as a society to help them overcome the trauma of living in a violent home, and to help save them from becoming another statistic, another victim, or another perpetrator of domestic violence. So together, we're going to ensure that the children in our community and their families have the resources and support that they need so we can move forward towards a brighter, safer future for our community. This symposium would not be possible without the support of our generous title sponsor, UHS, University Health System. Thanks to their generosity, we've had the ability to draw in brilliant speakers from across the nation to come educate everyone in our community on these issues. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the help of our fearless founder of the CCDV, the Honorable Judge Peter Sakai. From the beginning, he recognized the impact domestic violence has on our children, and without his foresight, none of this would be possible. So I mentioned that I'm your co-chair of the CCDV on behalf of the county, but I could not do this work alone. I am proudly joined in these efforts by my amazing co-chair, Deputy City Manager Maria Villagomez, on behalf of the city. Unfortunately, as the highest ranking woman in the city, she is in very high demand, and she's currently giving a keynote speech at another important event. So she could not join us this morning, but we are thrilled and grateful to be joined by our next speaker on behalf of the city, Erica Haller-Stevenson. She is the Violence Prevention Administrator for San Antonio Metropolitan Health District. She's going to talk to you a little bit more about the CCDV before introducing our next speaker. Erica?
Thank you, Judge Diaz, and welcome everyone. I'm going to be joining you throughout the symposium and promise it will not be from the roadway the next time. There are, of course, unexpected events as we travel in the morning. I'm going to take a minute to tell you a little bit more about the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence, which I'm going to abbreviate as CCDV. I'll move us through our welcoming session. So the CCDV was founded in July of 2019 through a special order that was signed and entered by local administrative district court Judge Peter Sakai in response to an alarming increase in domestic violence in Bexar County. Sorry, 1 second. I'm just having a technical problem for the moment. There we go, got that fixed. I apologize. So Judge Peter Sakai
Erica, we lost you there for a
in
second.
Bexar County.
There we go.
Okay, so I apologize. My apologies, folks. We know how these meetings can go, and virtual makes it more complicated, but we're glad you're here and that you're bearing with us. So moving us back to our reference to Judge Peter Sakai, who founded the group in 2019, he issued the administrative order in response to an alarming increase in domestic violence in Bexar County and the community's demands for action. The CCDV aims to address and prevent domestic violence in San Antonio and Bexar County using a public health approach by doing several things. One, disrupting the developmental pathways toward partner violence. Two, teaching safe and healthy relationship skills. Three, increasing cross-sector partnerships and transparency. Four, ensuring lethality assessments are used appropriately and result in action. Five, coordinating and streamlining access to services and trauma-informed response systems. Six, supporting survivors to increase safety and lessen harms. And finally, reducing access to weapons and increasing availability of rehabilitative programs. This city-county partnership convenes local leaders in the judiciary, law enforcement, prosecution, nonprofit, healthcare, and education sectors. I, as well as Deputy City Manager Maria Villagomez, are honored to work with area stakeholders who are deeply committed to wiping out domestic violence from our community. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Patricia Castillo. Patricia has been working to end violence against women and families for more than 35 years. In 1990, she co-founded the Peace Initiative, Putting an End to Abuse Through Community Efforts, a coalition of 48 agencies, organizations, and individuals, as well as the Family Assistance Crisis Teams based in San Antonio, Texas. Using collaboration and community organization, she serves as an advocate, educator, and technical assistance resource to civil, legal, medical, religious, activist, educational, human resource, and media groups. She's done casework at the women's shelter and with inmate women and their families at the county jail. She was the first social worker ever assigned to the Police Sex Crimes Unit and Homicide Bureau. She is a board member of the National Latino Alliance for the Elimination of Domestic Violence. She has worked internationally to serve as a technical support, and she currently serves as a tri-chair for the San Antonio and Bexar County Domestic Violence Task Force and the CCDV Nonprofit Committee. Patricia, I will now hand it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Erica. I appreciate your introduction. I'm happy to be here, excited for the work that we're going to be able to accomplish today and part of tomorrow. I am very honored to serve as one of the tri-chairs of the nonprofit committee alongside Marta Pelaez, who is the executive director of the Women's Shelter, Family Violence Prevention Services here in town, as well as with Julia Rodriguez Rainey, who works for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. I'm very honored this morning to introduce to you our speaker, our first speaker this morning. When I was given the charge of trying to find our keynote speaker, immediately this woman's name popped into my head. This morning, you're going to hear from Robin Peters Bennett. She is somebody who has dedicated her life to looking at what violence does to the lives of children. And she looks at all forms of violence, but she also has a focus on domestic violence. And that's what we're very concerned about in our community. By way of a survey that we did locally here in San Antonio by Lily Casura, she did a survey where she talked to about 1,500 respondents. And what she found, which was very shocking to all of us, was that in San Antonio, we're dealing with at least 4 generations of victims and survivors of domestic violence. And everybody who she spoke with had a grave concern about us and how we pass it on to the next generation. And so this is why Robin's talk this morning is very important. She has worked in the area of psychotherapy. She has a practice in Portland, Oregon, where she works with adults and children from a depth and imaginal perspective with a sensitivity to the relevance of interpersonal neurobiology within our relationships. So how the brain functions, right? She also works in child activism. She's an expert on the relationship between harsh discipline, child development, and long-term health, and speaks nationally on the topic. She's a leader in the growing movement to end sanctioned violence against children, which we refer to often as corporal punishment in the United States. She also provides consultation to professionals and professional groups on how to connect and respond to children, especially traumatized children. She also provides a therapeutic trauma-sensitive approach within the safety of a therapeutic relationship, because based on research of memory reconsolidation, the neuroconsequential model of therapeutics, Robin has created a structured approach that supports optimal efficacy of this protocol to serve children. And then finally, we know that we all seek safety from all our relationships, even when we can't tolerate relationships and act out in hurtful ways or withdraw into ourselves. Our apparent struggles and shortcomings are in large part adaptations for our own survival. And yet the inclination to move forward toward loving connection is always there. And that is why this work is so important, because of that which is most sacred, the familial relationships. We all want to have work and be loving and be nurturing and be respectful. This is all something that we're striving towards. And most importantly, what we have to remember today is that it is all doable. So let's take these next 2 days to really dig deep, go in depth into all of these issues. And Robin Peters Bennett is going to set the tone for our work together. Thank you.
Patricia, thank you so much. And Judge Diaz, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so privileged to be here. I feel like I'm at home with the people that do the work that I do. And so just thank you so much for inviting me here. I just want to begin. I'm going to share my screen so we can see. Is everyone able to, let me just do it this way. There we go. How's that? Can everyone see that? The picture of the mother?
We can see it, Robin. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. So I love this image because this is where I want to begin. This is conveying what we all are aiming for as parents in relationship to children. And it's also a beautiful image that explains through image, basically, what educators in the field of neuroscience and traumatology are trying to describe when they talk about safety. And what we're talking about here today is physiological safety. So, you might say, oh, I'm safe, I feel safe, I'm fine. But safety is, in this sense, is not just what you think. And it's also not especially what you feel. It's more that what is the body actually doing? So you may feel or think you're fine, but how is your body actually functioning? And what state are you in? Are you in a state of vigilance or reactivity? Is the body feeling safe? So we're talking about the autonomic system, which by nature is difficult for us to be aware of. It's the autonomic system. So in some ways it's unconscious. We just sort of take it for granted. But as you look at this picture of this mother and child, what you see is a child that feels safe. He's tipping his head to the side. You can see that his belly is out, and his mother is gazing directly into his eyes. And you can see that she's a little bit lower than him. And that of course, she's smiling, and you can feel the softness in her face. And so there's a kind of listening happening, even without words. There's a receptivity. He is receptive to her. He is receptive to connection. He's open and receiving whatever information she's sharing. And he's available to be cooperative. And what's beautiful about this is so is she. You can see that this is a mutual experience. And this is what our brains are always seeking. We're seeking connection, we're seeking safety, we're seeking an ability to be with each other. So when I talk about safety, I'm saying that I'm able to relax my body. It's a physical experience. I'm able to open my heart in the presence of another human being. And I can feel vulnerable. And just for me personally, just as I was looking in the chat and I was seeing all the people that are here, my heart opened because I feel especially safe in this group of people because I know that we align with so many similar, the passion to tend to families, to care for families. So the state of safety, receptivity is what we're aiming for, but also we can be in a state of reactivity naturally. And so the one thing I want you to really grasp in this particular lecture that I think would be so helpful, that has really changed the way I work with children and the way I am in relationship, is that function or your state function or your behavior, how you behave, is dependent on your state. It's foundational. So the way we behave is absolutely dependent upon the state in which our bodies are in, whether we're receptive or whether we're reactive. So am I in a state of beingness, of just being present here? Or am I in a state of reactivity, defensiveness, or even dissociation? So children, we're often preoccupied with their behavior. That's because, children's behavior can be extremely difficult. And also it can dysregulate us and throw us out of the state that this mother's in. So they throw off our equilibrium. So we, devise all sorts of ways to control behavior, to manage behavior, to shape behavior. But what we're understanding from this perspective, understanding that our state of safety or reactivity drives behavior, is that behavior itself is an emergent property of the quality of our state of being. It's how aroused or distressed I am is going to drive my behavior. So behavior is a communication about the state of the body. So what we begin to understand is that behavior is not simply a function of choice, because choice is cognitive. It's up in your prefrontal cortex. But if your brainstem is reactive, then your state is going to drive your behavior. And it's very difficult to make the kinds of decisions that we would want to make when we're in that state. So in the positive parenting community, we talk a lot about this, about the nervous system and how to help your body feel safe. And if you've been following any of that, you'll know this idea of the green zone, which is sort of your threshold of tolerance. And if you go up too high, you spin out and you're out of control. If you go below it, you get depressed and collapsed. So we're always trying to get children in the green zone where they feel receptive to learning, where they're able to listen and problem solve. But also we want to be in the green zone as well, to be able to have more tolerance for our children and to be empathic. And so, of course, this is a core issue to the families we're serving who often literally do not feel safe. one of the things I want to talk about is not just the nervous system, but the effect of the sensory system on your state and how important the body is, and the way we are in our bodies and the way we treat children's bodies in order to be in the state of well-being. So what happens if you're a parent and you yourself have difficulty being in your body because you're more dissociative and you're more scattered or vigilant because your environment has not felt safe? Or what happens if your child has difficulty being in their body? And those are a lot of the issues that the folks that we're working with, the children and families we're working with, have those issues. So being aware of your body, both internally and externally, influences how you behave. Your state of arousal influences how you think, how you feel, whether or not you can express empathy, whether or not you're able even to listen to words versus sound, your ability to be in relationship to others as well. So we can understand parenting skills like using reason and logic and natural consequences, and we might even know how to mirror feelings. But what happens when those things don't work? When we can't reason with a child, when we're mirroring their feelings and they're not doing well. So what I want to talk about, this is a core issue because for parents that are in a state of vigilance, it's very quick to move over the line to violence, to yelling, spanking, threatening children because they don't respond to reason, or we can't get them to relate to us or to follow cues or direction. And of course, as the parent, maybe they also cannot even get into that state of empathy or reason. So the goal is to help parents and children experience the state of well-being, this image of this mother. This is where we're aiming. Yeah. So being fully in the body, it supports this receptive state. And to be able to do that, we have to understand more about sensory integration, because what we know is a traumatized mind or brain has a very difficult time being in the body. And if you're not in the body, you cannot learn. If the environment is dangerous, if the body is regularly dosed with alarm, not being in your body is a pretty excellent strategy for surviving. So the problem is that sometimes this becomes a chronic strategy, even when there's no danger. So we're often working with families that are stuck in this state of vigilance and also stuck in a state of being slightly out of the body. So we know that sensory integration dictates how well you behave. And that when you have sensory integration, when you are fully in your body, you feel more alive. But when that system is offline, it makes us more vigilant and more disoriented and even more sensitive in terms of how our body feels. And we know that this is the work of Dr. Bruce Perry. Patricia was talking about the neurosequential model of therapeutics. It's a big word for basically saying that the lower brain and the body are very heavily impacted by trauma, and that we have to be more body-centered in the way we try to help heal from trauma. So we can't really be in this state that this mother and child are in if our body won't allow it. And so why would our body not allow it? Well, because it's busy trying to protect us from danger, of course. So just this is a big sciencey slide. Don't sweat it. You don't have to know what any of this means. I have a handout for you. You can look at it later. You can always email me if you have questions. But what I really want you to understand here is that sensory integration is really important for us to have a receptive brain that can learn versus one that's reactive and potentially violent. And so the thing to understand here is that there are, all information comes in through the brainstem first. And so when it does, we're trying to, the information needs to get up into the prefrontal cortex, because when it's up here, information from our brainstem, then we know how to make great decisions. We have empathy, we can think ahead, we can have executive functioning, we can relate to others in a social and loving way. But there's two pathways that all information comes up through. It comes up through what an interoceptive pathway, which is your awareness of your body, of inside, your awareness of the sensation in your body, and it comes up through an extraceptive pathway. They call it the parietal junction, but basically the other pathway is through movement and our relationship to the environment around us and how we move our body. So let me just talk a little bit about these two pathways. Well, one is that trauma disrupts both in us. And this is part of the problem of it getting passed down from generation to generation, is that when your interoceptive pathway is disrupted, you cannot feel consistent, safe, soothing physical contact. Now, of course, in this image, you can see that in fact, this child does. This child's resting directly on the mother. The mother's in a nice regulated yoga pose, and he's just there with her. So what is this pathway? Well, you'll start to recognize this in the children you work with, because if you have problems with this, and it can be based on your state of vigilance, so it can change, but you may not know when you're hungry or full. You may not know if you're sleepy. You may be unaware of your body temperature, breathing. You may not even know you're breathing. You may not have any bodily sensations. So I have provided to you an outline. It's a piece of paper with a bunch of words on it that are basically sensation words. And I think these are really important words to use with your clients and to begin to have them be aware of, because they are sensation words, and you will find many children and many adults that have trauma do not know how to do this. They don't have a clue, because they're not really receiving their body's information. They're paying attention to what's going on around them. Words like cold, congested, frozen, hot, limp, feeling open or puffy or prickly or tense or thick or sweaty or maybe warm and blubbery and cozy or yummy. See, these are words that are really sensations of the body. And that's what interoception is. I know when I'm tired. I know when I need to move. I know if I'm cold. I know when I'm hot. I know if something's alarming me, and I know if I feel good. So children that are traumatized often have a lot of difficulty recognizing what's going on in their bodies. So I'm going to just share some examples, because I work with these children all the time. I have a child in my practice who wakes every morning with a stomach ache or a headache. No medical reason. Wakes up angry, has somatic complaints, generalized pain and achiness. I have a child who can't tolerate wearing most clothes, even in the cold, and then abruptly is freezing, then too hot again, injures herself clumsily. I have a child who skips from one activity to another very quickly. She gets bored. She seeks excitement. She has an elevated resting heart rate. She doesn't really look me in the eye very much. Another one of them is hungry and then not hungry. She won't eat all day. Very typical. She'll come in, she'll start playing with me. And then she starts to feel better. She'll want to eat some pizza that's there. And then she'll want to eat my pizza too. And then she'll just be starving and she'll just eat all the pizza. And then she'll feel full. So this sort of awareness moving in and out. I have a child that spends most of her time moving, jumping in the garden, walking in the garden, throwing pears, digging, rarely looking at me. If she gets still and can't move, she becomes bored, and that boredom becomes intolerable. So this inability to know what's going on inside of your body means you don't know when you're getting angry, because you don't have any of the physical awareness that maybe your face is getting hot, that your fists are getting tight, that your muscles are tensing up, that your stomach is tight, or that your heart rate's increasing, or that it's beating fast, or that your chest feels tight, because that body awareness is not there. Anger just occurs. And of course, all of these symptoms become more problematic the more reactive. And a lot of these children don't even know where their body is. Exteroception pathway is more like what happens when they start moving their body. So I'm with a child yesterday, and I'm having him push my feet because he's in a hammock and he's pushing with his feet, my feet, but he knocks me back. I actually fall out of my chair because he doesn't have a sense of his body and how much pressure he's putting against my body, or he'll knock things over and break them. So this is very typical, and it can be misunderstood by parents as not caring or not paying attention. But really, it's not that the body itself cannot make sense of its environment. So children that struggle with sensory integration often behave as if they don't really even know where their body is. They might swing their arms around as if they don't even have them. They're jumping on things. They throw their body into things. They accidentally hit or kick you. They slobber on you. They don't know where your face is compared to where their face is, so they get too close, or they poke you, or they invade your body. They pick things up, including heavy things, and swing them around and throw them around as if, so you can just get the sense of how alarming being with children that have sensory integration issues have, and most traumatized children do. And you can see where your own body, if it's reactive, you might hit them, or you might, punish them because it feels so like, what are you doing? Sort of a feeling, right? And so sometimes children are angry when they're like this, but a lot of times it's just that they're not getting enough sensory input, and those systems are not fully online. And so when these children do have problems like this, because often they don't do very well in school, in large part because schools are not very sensitive to the sensory needs of children, and often impinge on children's physiological need for movement and for touch. This child I was telling you about that cannot sit or engage in conversation for any period of time, if he gets into the hammock and I am pushing him, and he can feel me pushing his body with my hand, and we're swinging, and he's getting all of this extraceptive feedback, all this like where my body is in space, he will start to tell me stories. He will start to share his feelings. I don't even have to mirror his feelings. I don't have to engage with him cognitively. He just starts talking to me because now his body's online, and he can start connecting to me from a different place. So part of what I focus on is just maintaining a melodic and pleasant voice, being very animated and readable so that he can really see that I am safe, and just being basically another safe animal in his presence, so that his body can feel me being kind toward him as well. So a few simple things to keep in mind, and why I have this slide, one of the most important reasons. And I want you to know, if you do have questions, I promise I'll answer them at the end of the session, because I'm not sure how to check the chat, and then also hang on to my thread of thought here. But part of why this is so important, this slide, is because there are things that we do in traditional parenting that impinge on sensory integration in a profound way, and it's working against us, and it's keeping us from actually seeing the progress we want to see in our children. And the first one is children need to move spontaneously. So when you think about punishment, all sorts of corporal punishment, sitting in a chair, being in timeout, putting your nose in the corner, all those sorts of things, it's about immobilizing the body. And we're really working against the regulation of the child, because if we can help their bodies become integrated, their behavior will improve naturally. So we want them to move spontaneously. And movement that's spontaneous is exquisitely important because it sends a signal to the body that says, I am safe, because I can just move spontaneously. I'm not vigilant or worried. The other is for the other side of the system is that children need to be able to reach out and touch and feel consistently safe with a regulated and calm adult. So this is where physical punishment is just completely off the table, because you never want to be a source of physical pain to your child. Accidents happen, but never to intentionally compromise. What you see here is the child's ability to regulate and to know his own body through his relationship to your body. And that's how children really learn it. Yeah. So when this boy is in the hammock, he gets all this extraceptive information. He's swinging, so there's lots of movement. He feels me pushing on him in a way that feels good to him. He can feel the air as he's moving. And he starts to turn inward and notice what he's sensing. And a lot of times what he'll do is ask for a snack. He'll become aware he's hungry. So of course, you feed him, because food is part of therapy. It's very fundamental to children feeling well. And anyone that works with children knows this is the case. And it's true for adults as well. He starts to listen. So his tone of voice, he starts to listen and converse with me. So he's not just listening to the sound of my voice. I'm really noticing he's paying attention to what I'm saying. He's listening to the words. That's more prefrontal. So he's moving up into the prefrontal cortex, because those connections, those pathways are opening, and he can respond to me. And frankly, it feels good to me. It's easier for me to genuinely appreciate him and notice things about him that I like, and the interaction starts to be fulfilling for both of us. His sensory system online, and mine starts to be more online, and we build this connection with each other. So, of course, this is a tall order for someone who has a history of childhood trauma themselves as a parent. So you notice that this mother is resting, this image here, and that the child is on her, and that her body is actually anchoring him. He regulates his own physiology through the touch and feeling of her physiology. And we know that children cannot know their bodies except in relationship to another body. So this is where we also have to be very loving to the mothers and to the fathers. So just quickly want to share this really interesting research, because it's really validating what we knew to be true, is that when we had parents reduce statements of yelling, negative commands, and physical punishment, we noticed that their behavior improved. And the other thing that this research measured is what's called heart rate variability. And all that means is it measured the physiological state of arousal of the child. And what they noticed is that improved. So that's a measure of how well is your autonomic system functioning, how safe are you, and heart rate variability. And so what we noticed is that these children just behaved better. And there wasn't a real correlation to being positive, to, there was pieces where people were doing problem solving and encouraging, and all of that, of course, is really wonderful. But interestingly, in this research, that wasn't really a high correlation. The correlation was to improved biology. So it's so interesting. What we're really shifting out of is out of the mind and into the body, and help children physiologically feel better, and then they start to feel better. I'm going to just talk a little bit about Spanking. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, but you have this as a resource. Just interesting stuff that's important to understand, because of course spanking is very, very common. So we know that if you're more likely to spank if you were punished yourself. So there's a habitual pattern there. If you're in a lower socioeconomic status, i.e. stress, lots of stress. If you're under 30 as a parent, if your community condones it, which it does in many communities, and if you have a toddler. Well, no surprise, right? Because children, toddlers, they don't reason, right? So again, this knowledge of how to be with the body of a child is so important, because it's really hard to reason and work with children that are that young. Spanking. Okay, so here's just more of the really cascading avalanche of research to show that spanking increases aggression. And if you understand the physiology, you start to understand why, because of course aggression comes from these systems being offline and the body not feeling safe. There's increased defiance, which again is a blocking or a reactivity to others, not feeling safe. Lack of empathy, because the prefrontal cortex isn't online, increases peer isolation. So social interactions are harder, poor quality relationship with your mom and dad. The children are more likely to be dishonest and to conceal. It's so strange because these are the reasons we often spank children, and yet it makes these things worse. But delayed moral development and reduces social engagement. And clearly all of this is because it affects the brain in the lower brain physiological ways. It also reduces prefrontal gray matter in the brain. So this is because it's delaying development. Increased cortisol, which is a stress hormone, poor executive functioning. The executive functioning of the prefrontal cortex is not available. And so of course it negatively impacts the development of IQ, developmental delays in vocabulary. It just impinges on the higher brain because the higher brain is online when the lower brain feels safe. We know that spanking is transactional and cascading. What does that mean? It means if you spank, then you spank more because it creates more of it is the problem. And it's cascading, meaning hitting little children when they're 2 or 4 or 5. You actually see negative consequences later on. It's like in early adolescence, you will see smaller brain structures, more reactivity, and in many ways, more pain. The child experiences more pain, less functional dopamine really in their adolescence. We know that boys are at greater risk for antisocial behavior. This is sad research to discover that affection does not mediate the negative risks. So hitting a child and then hugging them later actually can increase their anxiety, much like in domestic violence relationships between partners. A really important study that came out on adverse childhood experiences. I don't know how many of you know about this, but I am going to give you a link that you can go out and listen to an amazing TED Talk by Nadine Burke-Harris, who is the Surgeon General of the state of California, talking about this huge study of over 17,000 people. But what they found that they didn't know in the original study, and I went back and did this research with Dr. Tracy Afifi and the CDC, and we found that spanking, even if there's none of the other negative things, no domestic violence, no any form of child maltreatment, none of the things that you think are what a family would have more dysfunction, even if that's not present, this study showed that you still have an increase in alcohol abuse and drug abuse in adolescents, and children in their adolescence are more likely to commit suicide. So you see these negative effects way down the road from what happened early on from spanking children. So I'm just going to quickly tell you a little more about that ACEs study, because I think it's, in a broader sense, so important to understand if you work with traumatized families. It was basically 10 indicators: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, or feeling unloved. If you have experienced divorce or your mother was in a domestic violence situation, if there's any substance abuse, mental illness, or if a father or mother was in prison. And what they noticed is that the number of these, so 1 to 10, you could have a 1, 2, 3, let's say you have a 4, that if you had 4 or more, your IV drug use chance of it was 13 times the rate. You're 12 times more likely to attempt suicide, 5 times more likely to be alcoholic, 4.5 times more likely to experience depression, and 2.5 times more likely for heart disease. And this is just touching the tip of the iceberg. I mean, every conceivable health risk, cancer, diabetes, it goes on and on, is directly correlated to how many ACEs you essentially had as a child. And they concluded that it's the leading cause. High adversity in childhood is the leading cause of illness, death, and poor quality of life. So it's really amazing discovery that in this study, they actually collected spanking, different than physical abuse, as defined by the person answering the questions, and that spanking, even when everything else is fine or seemingly so, is very harmful to children. So I want to give you a model of how to begin to think about, okay, if we're not using reasoning all the time, or we're not just mirroring feelings, what are we doing? And I just want to share that we had this beautiful webinar. We have representation from the Latinx community, the African American community, the Chinese community, across the board, positive parents that are out there, educators that are on social media that are so talented, talking about how do you deal with activating behaviors. So it's a free webinar. We have so much good feedback on it. So it's a resource for you, and it's a resource for your family. But here's the model of that whole webinar, is based on this idea that you regulate first, then you relate to a child, and then you reason with them. And what happens is often we are trying to relate or trying to reason, and their nervous system is not online, and their bodies are not integrated. The sensory integration isn't there. So how do you regulate the lower brain? Here's just a few things, which you can go and listen to that webinar and get lots more ideas. But welcomed touch. So physical touch can be really, really regulating. The other is prosodic tone of voice. And boy, does this go against the way that my mother and grandmother raised me, with the firm, you know, they give me that tone. And I knew I was in deep trouble when I got that tone of voice. So, you know, I'm sure if my grandma knew about this research, she would agree with me. She was always open to new information, but she just didn't understand that at the time. But really, having a melodic tone of voice is incredibly regulating to the physiology. So like if you ever hear men, big tough men, and they reach down to a dog and they'll start giving this sweet voice to their dog, you know, that's what I'm talking about. Or the Mary Poppins voice, you know, just think Disney movies and Disney songs. They're all within that range. They're not too high where they're alarming, and they don't have a lot of predatory sound. And they are saying, it's okay to connect with me. Welcomed eye contact, very clear facial expressions, pausing, breathing with, and spontaneous movement. Then you can move to these other, you know, once the child starts to look at you and maybe even talk, then you know you're getting there. Then you can start to mirror feelings and connect. And then when they're totally online and you're both feeling good, you can problem solve and talk it out and talk what happened and go from there. So here is the webinar. It's at stopspanking.org. And I think that is it. And here is how you can connect with me if you have any questions or anything like that. And I just want to open it up to, please, any questions people have. Yes, the webinar is on stopspanking.org is the website. You can get a copy of the presentation, absolutely. And I also had provided a handout of sensing words that I think are really great. The question is, I'm curious how to go about explaining this to authoritarian, domineering parents in a way that they'll listen. Yes, absolutely. So the nice thing you can do with parents who rely on authoritarianism is to help them understand the brain, and that the body, when it gets into a state of vigilance, you can get compliance, and you can kind of see it. The child will get frozen, they're sort of sitting there, and you get compliance, but you'll notice that they continue to be dysregulated and they tend to have problems. So a lot of times when you're dealing with parents, they know they're having trouble and that something's not wrong. They just don't know what to do differently. And so you can begin to talk to them about, this is how the brain feels safer. And also send them to that webinar, because these are people that are talking about this stuff all the time. Mr. Chaz, he's out on TikTok. I think he has 1 million followers. He's amazing. He's a Montessori school teacher. He's talking about people that are using spanking all the time. He's very accessible. And so Mr. Chaz, check him out. He's very helpful. This person says, I really appreciate this information. I see how my daughter speaks gently to my grandson. She handles him so welcoming. He was just diagnosed with autism. Yes, and the thing is, autism or spectrum kinds of behaviors are largely undiagnosed, particularly in poorer families. And often in schools, they end up with a diagnosis of conduct disorder. You know, they're being interpreted as oppositional, but what's really going on is it's impossible to be in their body. Their physiology is so disrupted. They don't know where their arms and legs are. It's just hard to be like social when you feel that way. As a parent, I feel like this is asking a lot of parents, how can this be incorporated into prenatal care? Oh, such a great question. Yeah, because prenatal is ahead of time, thinking about it ahead of time. And what a great time to begin to teach about the neurobiology of regulation when they're not overwhelmed yet. Yeah. And, you know, it is a lot asking a parent. So I don't ask them. I actually consider them part of this. I'm the anchor. So I'm trying to help them feel regulated. So when they say, oh, I'm worried about my son and he's going to be a criminal because he's doing this behavior, I just really try to be with them and around their concern and how fair it is that they're worried about it. And I really regulate with them. And then when they become more regulated because they trust me, because I'm in it with them, I'm non-judging, then they can start to be open to some of my ideas, pretty cognitive, but I'm going to start with just regulating the parent. I'm going to be with the parent's body. So I'm operating from this same model of what I want them to do with their children, I'm doing with them. Okay, I think we're out of time.
Thank you so much, Robin. It was such a pleasure having you with us. What an insightful and thorough presentation. We will share your materials with our participants afterwards for those folks that asked, but thank you so very much for being our keynote speaker. We've
likewise,
really
thank you for having
you.
me. And thank you so much for your mission and your dedication. It's so, so beautiful. I'm so grateful for the work you do.
Thank you, Robin. Really appreciate that. And so to everyone in the room, we're ready to proceed on to our next session. So if you can go back to the program that took you, that had the link to access this session, you'll find the link to access the next session. Please also don't forget to check out our resource guide that we emailed out to all of you that contains resources for families in need. Thank you, Robin. We will see you all in the next session.